Tony Keefe, we are so proud of this book. I think it's going to connect with so many people. How the Boogeyman became a poet. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration, because it was your therapist who actually suggested that you release and read these poems.
Something like that. But yeah, there was around 2019 when I knew that I was probably going to write this book. I was laid off from a full-time job, and there was a lot of mess going on, and I was enrolled in therapy. And it was a lot of expressed, like suppressed anger and sadness and confusion that I was projecting in other places. And my therapist was like, Tony, you know that box of poems that you've been carrying around since you've been a kid? You should check those out and maybe unpack and see what's going on. And sure enough, I spent a weekend reading through these poems I wrote myself as a kid and was fascinated by all kinds of things. But I cried a little bit. I tore some of them up. But it was a ritual. And yeah, it led towards the creation of this book.
Talk a little bit about that feelings you had, especially, I think you go through something as a teenager in your 20s, growing up, and then you read them as an adult, or you have a different perspective. I mean, what was it like for you to go back and not just think like, oh, I remember writing some poems, but going back and seeing those feelings you had at that time?
Oh, affirming is the word. And by the way, shout out to Jason Reynolds for that blurb about life affirming masterpiece. Is I I felt so human, if that makes sense. Right? I think that as a kid, not saying that I felt like an alien as a kid, but I kind of was alienated as a kid, if that makes sense, right? And so there was this feeling that I was not whole or somehow complete. And then growing up with those gaps in my completeness as an adult, being able to unpack those poems and reflect on those memories, like, wait a minute, Tony, you were a complete person the entire time. You just didn't realize how bright you were. And so these poems made like this is your reminder of your humanity, right? You were always whole, you were always complete. And so yeah, that's what it's been like. It was affirming. It's like, wow, I survived and I became a full-time poet. I am a poet for a living. Like so
I
now,
love it. I love it. Yeah.
yeah.
You break the book out into three different parts. Tell us a little bit about the different parts of your life that you go through in this book.
Yeah, so in this book, there are sort of three kind of main stories that kind of run together. One is how do I become a first generation college student? The second one is how do I start coming out of the closet as gay? And of course, the third is like how do I really discover like the poetic voice and the power of what it can do for me and affirm. And so the story takes place in the Washington, D.C. metro area, my hometown. Spring 1999 and ending in fall 2000. So it's a short, like 2 year time span in the life of a senior in high school trying to figure out, I think I like boys. I know I want to go to college. No one has ever been. And I can barely afford to get there. What do I do? And how do those poems fit in? And so those are the stories that run. And then you get a chance to meet my family and you'll learn that I grew up around a really supportive family, a great network of close friends. You also realize the relationship that I had with some teachers and my like discovery of language. I write this book in verse and in some parts African American vernacular English on purpose for the sake of just having fun with the language, and so readers can enjoy it. There's hip hop embedded in the book, and of course there's poetry, like actual poems I wrote. And I highly recommend, if folks have not done so, grab the audiobook because I self-narrated it. And so to read this book is one thing, but to hear it is a whole different kind of experience.
And why not do both? I mean, that's an amazing way to maybe see the words on the page, but then also get a different perspective when you hear your voice saying it.
Yeah, yeah, it's in verse. It's written in rhythm and rhyme, and that's the thing. I want people to sort of experience again the joy of writing something that comes from a poet who thinks poetically. And I do not have an MFA. I'm not academically trained as a writer. This is just I've been developing this since I was a kid.
Let's talk a little bit about growing up and coming up, because I think a lot of times for LGBTQ plus youth, before you come out, or if you're having struggles either with your family or internally or with your peers, you look for a book, you look for an artist, you look for a
Mm.
show that you connect with that almost saves you at that point, that you have something. Did you have that growing up,
I
or what
did
was that project
not.
for you?
Yeah, that's great. I did not. And I'm glad you had that question because this is a really important element that I hope that readers will understand is, if someone were to ask me as a kid, Tony, are you gay? I would have said no. And it wasn't so much I didn't believe I knew there was something different about me, but because I hadn't done it, I wasn't like I was kissing boys or like I didn't do anything with any boy in this book until I'm in college, right? So it's like this belief that I am something, but I don't have something to validate like what it is. And there were no models, there were no movies, there were no books. I didn't start reading Elin Harris books until I was like in college, and there were no TV shows. And so all of this was about discovery. The beautiful thing that did happen though is this book takes place in 1999, which for me as a teenager was right when the internet was, dialed tone and was accessible, but chat rooms were made available, right? You could start Google, I mean, you using Yahoo to like search keywords. And so the internet became my research space to figure out more about me. And that's when I discovered my community. I had a AOL buddy messenger list and with gay men all around the world, and so I found that community in that virtual space.
Oh, exactly. And what are you hoping that this does, especially for the kids that are reading it now that may be going through that same phase that you were going through in 1999, that they could either put this in their bag, maybe read it at home, or just have something that they can always go back to of like, I'm not alone.
Yeah, that you hit the nail right on the head. That's it. I want and I hope younger readers, adult learners, anybody who grabs hold of how the Boogeyman became a poet, that as they read this, they're able to at least think about who might my own boogie people be, right? What might I be battling against? Not saying everybody's battling things. I don't want to make it seem like everybody has a boogie person. But if you read this book and you feel something in your gut twitching, perhaps there's a boogie person of your own. And how are you discovering your freedom from that boogie person, right? For me, I found it through poetry. For someone else, it might be music or, craft making or, I don't know, writing books.
Or writing books. And then you're also you're on a book tour right now. You're going through a bunch of different cities. Talk a little bit about what that experience is like for you.
This is so wonderful. I have to be honest. This is dreams coming true on a scale that this is why I say I'm joyful. The little boy in this book did not believe I would ever be in a space where my book is being on tour, right? And so I am a full-time educator and an artist. I run a for-profit business actually called EdMC Academy, and I'm always doing work in schools and communities and libraries with poetry and hip hop and all that stuff. And so what happens now is now that I have a book, it's sort of like I was already sort of touring, if you will, with my work and my company. Now that the book is with me, these worlds have sort of aligned together. And that's what created this tour. I was already headed to places. And it was like, oh, I can now bring a book with me. And the places I'm going to are places where people who would want to read this book are going to be. This is great.
Awesome. Well, Tony, thank you so much for your time today. How the Boogeyman became a poet now in stores, and much success to you. And I can't wait to talk to you in the future.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Peace. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.